I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Cultworthy. I'm your host, Antonio, and this is a very special episode. I am doing a Valentine's Day episode, and I'm not really known as much to be like the romantic guy around here. A lot of the movies I would bring to the show that are like romance movies, romantic comedy movies, always have some kind of like macabre theme to them, or else they're kind of twisted because, again, this is the Cultworthy. So I had to reach out to a friend of mine and say, hey, I want you to bring a good Valentine's movie that you think I will enjoy, because I feel now my podcasting friends know what I dig. And so I left this episode entirely in his hands. My good friend, Josh Skaar of Talking Smack. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here. Very happy to talk about one of my favorite movies, something that really just it hits the right spots for me. So I'm dying to hear what you thought about it, having finally seen this. We've been talking about this one for a while.
We have. And, I think we still hear, at least I do, about our amazing team up like 2-3 years ago about a Goofy movie, talking about like the sentimentality of it, how deep inside we are softies. I just don't really allow myself to be a softie too often because the movies that I tackle really don't have that theme to it. But I do love a movie that gets me in the heartstrings, gets me emotional. And I had a feeling that if I gave you the option of a film, that you were going to find something that you knew was going to tug at me a little bit. And we'll see if we got there or not. But first of all, Talking Smack, how's it going? What's going on in your world?
Oh, it's going all right. If this is our Valentine's Day episode, we will have released a really cool interview we had with someone who wrote a book for Marvel, not just like a comic book, but they were like commissioned by Marvel to write a book from the perspective of an investigative journalist interviewing Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel, and it's like a collection of like internet posts and news article clippings and just kind of giving a character background of Carol Danvers as a character in the Marvel universe. And it's all set, like it's written as if it's set within the Marvel universe. And it's really cool interview with Kelly Fitzpatrick, who wrote the book. Can't wait for everyone to hear it. Like I said, at this point, that episode will have come out. Or no, actually, sorry, that episode will be coming out in a couple of weeks. We will have recorded it, but that episode will be coming out in a couple of weeks on the 26th. This next episode we have coming out on the 19th, I believe, will be Captain America: Brave New World. And we're just on a nice little run of episodes coming out. We had a What You Doing that just will be recorded shortly after this episode. So just good stuff, and we're finding a nice little groove again.
Yeah, I definitely think you're finding a groove. I don't often listen to the video game episodes because I'm not a gamer, so I don't really have a whole lot of investment in that. If anything, it makes me want to go back and play games, which I do not have time for. So I skip those, but I love the What You're Doings. And with the exception of the new releases that you guys see before me, I like to go back and review those as well, because it's like, I don't want to hear, because you guys are spoiler heavy. It's kind of your thing, but you give good warnings. And then I go back and catch up. But yeah, the What You're Doings, and especially these guests you've been having lately, these authors.
I don't know how it's happening.
You guys are killing it. I feel like we're doing pretty good over here on my side too. Like I'm getting a lot of interesting people in the film world, prestigious film podcasters. It's like, what is it about the last 4 months that we're like really doing a lot of groundwork in the sense of fascinating guests and not just each other all the time?
Yeah, we had Diana McCollum from the From Superheroes Network on. She wrote a book, The Sex Lives of Superheroes. It's a much longer title technically, which I have not memorized it, but yeah, Sex Lives of Superheroes was a really good, interesting read where it's not what you think it is. It's not the Mallrats Brody obsessed with. Is the thing made of rock and that sort of idea. It's more taking a scientific research paper idea and putting it into a superhero concept. So like, how long can Reed Richards make his thing before it can't become erect anymore, and those sort of things? Because like, they're not questions that I would think to ask, but these are questions that obviously Diana has seen come across the internet. She and her partner have been doing From Superheroes for a long time. I mentioned in our episode, I've been following their webpage at the very least since like 2013. So getting to talk to someone like her, who I have been following in her podcasting journey for forever, is super cool and just a great opportunity.
Yeah, no, they're great. So any of my listeners, if you've heard any of the collaborations with Talking Smack on this show or me on their show, go back and check out some of these episodes. They got some really great guests. And I don't know, there's a few that I might try and poach this year too. I'm like, oh, I would love to speak about that person and cover topics that you guys didn't cover in that episode. So to get into the meat of this week's show, we are going to be speaking about a film that I had never seen. Like, it's very rare that someone brings a movie to the show that I have not seen. I know of its existence, and we'll get into why I kind of avoided it. But like I said, I always trust your judgment. And so let's get into the film. Cue dramatic music. The year is 2013, and in this film we follow Tim Lake, a young man who discovers on his 21st birthday that the men in his family can travel through time. His father explains that this gift doesn't allow them to change major historical events, but it can be used to revisit and alter personal experiences. Despite his new power, Tim learns that trying to perfect every moment doesn't always lead to happiness. He also realizes the importance of appreciating life's small imperfections. The narrative weaves themes of love, loss, and passage of time with an emotional climax involving a family member's terminal illness. Tim learns that time, while precious, should be lived in the present, appreciating the beauty of ordinary days in Richard Curtis's film About Time. So before we even get into this, I'm not sure if we've had this conversation. I think we might have in like the chat rooms that I hate Richard Curtis movies. I really do. I hate Love Actually. I hate Four Weddings and a Funeral and Notting Hill. And it's not that I don't like Hugh Grant in those films. It's just I am not a fan of Richard Curtis's kind of sappy, sweet, melodramatic romantic comedies. Now, he did do a movie I liked, the Pirate Radio movies. Did you ever see that one? Or I think it's called The Boat That Rocked. It's not his typical fare. It's like an ensemble comedy that takes place on this ship outside of the UK that was broadcasting rock and roll during a time where the BBC had rock and roll banned. So it was pirate radio, and it was outside the BBC's jurisdictions. Now, I liked that movie, and there was some romantic comedy stuff, but mostly it was ensemble, historical, kind of gross out comedy in a way too. But there's just something about romantic comedies written by this guy where it's like, I just kind of roll my eyes. And I was very concerned when I looked up what this movie was about, because the first thing it said was romantic comedy in the description. But it also had a /science fiction. And so that kind of piqued my interest. So that kind of got me believing you a little bit more. I'm going to say right off the bat, first impressions of this movie, it is not what I thought it was. It was not nearly as eye-rollingly painful as I thought it would be compared to his other romantic comedies. And I got to tell you, I have a few complaints, but for the most part, I really liked it. And I am going to watch it again, this time with my partner who hasn't seen it either. And she thought it was weird that I was going to watch a romantic comedy without her. I'm like, well, let me just get through it first before I have your opinion, because I don't want to toxify my opinion on the show. So what's your history with this movie, man?
So I had no idea this movie was even coming out when it did in 2013. I received an email for 2 free tickets when it was coming into theaters from my local theater. They used to do, or maybe I was going to the movies more often, where they're like, hey, maybe this guy will spread the news and let everyone know about these other movies coming out. Cause I just recently, I think either today or yesterday, I had a Facebook memory show up that was like, hey, you went and saw The Gray the other day and you bragged about it. And with this one, my now wife and I had been living together for a few months, and we got the email for these tickets. Obviously, childless, nothing better to do with our days. So, free movie, heck yeah! Let's see what this is about. And we were just so pleasantly surprised that it wasn't just like you just said, not a romantic comedy in the sense that it's like the Hallmark formula where they find a way to come together, they break up, circumstances happen where they realize that they're better together, and they live happily ever after. That is the setting of this movie, or the framing device of this movie. And then there's a whole different message that comes out of it through the framing device of a romantic comedy, which, as you alluded to, a little bit of that is set in science fiction with the time travel element.
I like that the time travel element too is I'm not going to say it's entirely original, but they simplify it so it doesn't have to deal with so many of the paradoxes that a lot of time travel films, have an issue with, where you can poke apart the logic of a time travel narrative in a movie. Where this one, Bill Nighy is the father, who's great in this movie. I mean, he is in most Richard Curtis movies and he does great in them, but the idea that this is like a mental type of time travel, and like you can only affect your own interpersonal life. He does a pretty decent job at placing like boundaries of what the time travel can do. You can't have a time travel movie with a bunch of, plot hole possibilities. And I let all those go because it's a time travel movie. If you go and watch a time travel movie just to poke apart the logic in it, then you're not going to take any of the entertainment value out of it. You're just looking for ways to poke holes in the plot, right? That's why I'm not a huge fan of time travel movies, but I also don't hyper analyze them the way that so many people do. So the fact that this time travel, you can only go back to a certain point and change a certain point, and we can get to the dynamics of that later. But it's interesting. Like the fact is that only the males can do it. Like only the men can do that. And I was wondering why. Why is it only the men that can do it? Why can't the daughters? At the same time, it also goes back to the idea of the physiology of it, where once a new conception essentially is placed, or a new birth from the man's sperm, his own genetic material, that becomes a stopping point. So that made sense to me. It's like, okay, they went back and they kind of fixed my fuzzy logic of why can only dudes time travel. So I was kind of fine with that one. I let it go. What were your thoughts on that aspect of it?
I like that they set up some loosey-goosey time travel rules. Like they do a pretty good job establishing early on. Like you said, you can only go within certain points of your lifetime that you remember. Like you have to recall specific places, times, where you were, and you have to do it in a dark place and whatever. But I think they do a really good job of establishing like when, how, and where you can time travel. I think the only part of it that really the nitpicky part of my brain gets at is the very first time we see Tim time travel. He goes back to New Year's Eve and he goes into a wardrobe. We would call it a wardrobe, but Brits would call it a cupboard. It's where Tim has all his hanging clothes. He goes in there, clenches his fists, and he ends up there on New Year's Eve. So like my big question with that moment is, does Tim in that moment just disappear into the cupboard up there? Like what happens to Tim in that timeline, where if he was anywhere else, was he downstairs, was he in the basement, does he just disappear and then he ends up in the closet or whatever? That's a weird part of the process to me, because it would mean that at some point he just decided to stand in his closet for a little while to justify the time he popped in there. But it's also not important enough to have really dig into. It's just a weird thing to think about, but it's also not important to the message of the movie. Because like what you're talking about with why is it only the men, I think it's more just the story doesn't require women to have the ability, because later on in the movie he takes his sister back with him after he reveals the secret, and like that's a very important part of the movie because he learns a very important lesson with his ability to time travel, because that's the first time he ever tries to do something that's not entirely selfish with his time travel. It's the first time he tries to fix like an existential familial problem that he realizes. It's kind of a Superman moment for him, because one of the big things with Superman is his dad. One of the common tropes is that, like, in the 1977 film, John Pa Kent dies of a heart attack, and it's a lesson for Clark to learn that even with all his powers, he can't save everyone, because sometimes life just happens. And so what happens with Kit Kat in the future, he tries to fix it in the past, but then he realizes, like we talked about earlier, it's a fixed point in time if he wants to have the same child that he's known for 2 years at this point. And now he comes back and he's got a son instead of a daughter. He realizes he can't go beyond a certain point in time. Otherwise, it could alter everything that he holds dear as well, not just fixing one problem for his sister.
Right. It erases chunks of his timeline. And it also made me wonder, like, how many times are we not seeing him going back to fix things? Like, what if he actually made that trip several times to get the result he actually wanted? We don't really see the growth between the moment where he realizes that he has a different child now, and then it cuts to a few months later. We can be left to assume that he actually went back a few times because he's known to do that. It's part of his whole discovering why it is important to be happy with life instead of going back and changing it. One of the things that kind of freaked me out at first, dude, but then I kind of got on board with other Richard Curtis movies. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of Richard Curtis, especially with Love Actually and especially with Notting Hill, is that I do have a hard time with men writing romantic comedies and putting so much emphasis on that they know what the female brain is actually thinking, and writing dialogue for the female brain and writing experience for the female brain. Especially with him, I feel oftentimes it comes off masculine. So therefore, the female characters don't always feel 100% sincere to me. That's always been my biggest problem with Richard Curtis movies. This movie, he doesn't do that. Rachel McAdams as Mary, who's like the main character, we spend so little time with her and with her own, like, let's say, inner psyche, that I never felt that, because what the focus is on Domhnall Gleeson's character of Tom being always trying to make things better, correct things, take advantage of things. And that's where it gets creepy. It's like, how many times can I go back and make myself charming for this woman so she falls in love with me? It's kind of like the Groundhog Day thing, where it's like Phil spends so much time trying to make himself the right version of the person that the girl wants, and then he has to be rejected and called a creep before he learns, like, hey, maybe I just need to be a good person for myself, and then love will come along. I feel like we don't get that fulfillment early enough in the movie, so it does come off as creepy. But then I appreciated the fact that Richard Curtis is writing this character and directing this character as it should be creepy, because I think us guys unintentionally are creepy sometimes, because we're just trying to make what we think the right decision is to get the girl, get the attention, get this. In our minds, we're just putting in the work. But from an outsider's point of view or from a woman's point of view, it can come off kind of creepy. And so I think that he embraced that narrative with this character where we're supposed to feel like he is being kind of a creep, because it pays off later. And that's what was scaring me with this movie. I'm like, am I supposed to really like this guy? Because I feel like he's getting creepier and creepier the more he's utilizing this power. But then it does pay off. So I gave it the time to fix itself, and it did. And I thought that was a really clever way of making this movie, because there's nothing better for me than a hero that we don't trust until later on in the film, where we not only gain his trust, we are now rooting for him. And this movie kind of did that for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're talking about is kind of juxtaposed in the first time he meets Mary, Rachel McAdams' character, with his friend Jay, because the first time they meet, they end up meeting like on a literal blind date. They go to this restaurant that is completely pitch black. All the servers are blind. you basically have a blind experience with your meal, and you're sitting at a communal table talking with people that you can't see. And he and Mary hit it off. And Jay is being this creep with Mary's friend Joanna, played wonderfully by Vanessa Kirby. And but you see Domhnall Gleeson's Tim's genuine charisma just kind of come forth as he's being just very genuine with Mary the first time he meets her. And like my favorite line in the entire movie is when he gets Mary's number and he's like, I used to think this phone is shit. Now it's the most valuable possession I have. Like, I'm sorry. No woman is walking away from that line and not thinking like, okay, that guy's getting some the next time I see him.
Right.
I can almost promise you like that. It's if it's delivered sincerely and like, well, that's a good ass line. But then once the time travel shenanigans happen where he tries to fix his roommate's play, which causes a ripple effect of him losing Mary's number, that's where the creepiness starts to come in. And like, you're kind of wondering, is he a good person with this? Like, obviously he fell head over heels in love with this girl in one night in one sitting. And now he wants to do whatever he can to get her back. And he finds out that, holy crap, if I had a like 6-hour window where if not for that chance meeting at the blind bar, she would have met someone else. And now all of a sudden she's in love with someone else, which, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I think my biggest problem with the film happens in this sequence because, to what you were saying with Richard Curtis's writing of women, Mary in this sequence, once we get past the blind bar, feels more like she's just interested in finding a relationship rather than interested in being in love, or like the fact that Tim did something so profound and like created this like spark for her. Excuse me. And so when she ends up meeting Rupert, and then Tim goes back in time to interrupt the party and their chance meeting, that's where I'm like, this is a little creepy. This is a little like not cool, especially when they add in the extra dagger, which is supposed to be played for laughs, where they just bump into Rupert on their way out and they're like, oh man, what a dickhead. And she just kind of looks back and is like, yeah, right. Like, it is funny, but at the same time, it's one of those things where he's just like really peppering it in that he's not being a great person in this moment.
So one of the things I can say, like, again, going back to Richard Curtis and his movies, there is a formulaic thing that he's got going on, and he does it especially with women. And I don't know, maybe he's just a very efficient screenwriter in the sense, like, I have to make the movie move quickly. I need to get these relationships going. When you look back at most Richard Curtis movies, and this one has a lot of strong parallels to the first movie he wrote. I'm not sure if you've seen the film, but it's called The Tall Guy with Jeff Goldblum and Emma Thompson, like her first movie as well. There's a lot of parallels where, in the sense of like, there is a theatrical play going on that changes the course of relationships. She is a woman that seems aloof at first, but once they're on their first date, all of a sudden he can just get her in bed right away. Like, he moves relationships really quickly. He does it in Notting Hill. He does it in Love Actually with several characters. Like, people just fall in love and have sex right away. I mean, maybe it works differently in England. I don't know. But that's one of the things, too, is it's like, if they would have spent too much more time on Rachel McAdams' character, I think that she would have seemed more flawed than the movie should allow. Like, the flaws we're supposed to focus on are Tom's flaws, and we are supposed to like Rachel McAdams, but at the same time, we are given little hints that she is, a little challenging. Her parents are super conservative, and she's not, right? She was probably a disappointment to them if they knew what she was really like, and that's cool. I'm not saying that every female character in a movie has to be like the Pollyanna, right? They all can be different types of personalities, and these ones seem a little bit more edgy and dangerous. Even Charlotte, played by Margot Robbie in an early role, she's the same way too, right? Like, she's aloof when he first loves her in the early days, but then when he bumps into her years later, she's willing to go to bed with him like on night one. So I think there is something to the way that he writes women. Again, to each his own, but I feel like that is one of his formulaic flaws is like some of these women are just way too fast. I'm not sure how we're supposed to feel about that as audience members. Again, we might have a loss in translation from someone who's in the UK to us, Western Americans. I don't know. And I'm not a Pollyanna, that's for sure, but I noticed that trend in a lot of his films.
I think with Margot Robbie's Charlotte, the second time they meet, when he takes Rory out for a play, his friend from the lawyering firm,
Rory,
played wonderfully by Joshua Maguire. I think everyone is on point in this movie. Like their charisma is off the charts. Their likability is just phenomenal. But when Charlotte shows up and Tim kind of like tries to replay the moment a few times, like that's another moment where I'm a little taken aback by Tim's process, because he sees her and he's like, oh, that's the girl that's my first love. Like, oh my God. And Rory says something hilarious, which is like, if you had sex with her, you just die. You just
right.
die. Which, like, I'm sure that's probably true.
Yeah, I would say so.
But Tim tries like 3 different times to approach her, and then finally he's just like, you know what? Not worth the problem. Let's just go. And then she sees him outside. They go and have dinner. And I think that from a storytelling perspective is a good enough spot to continue where the story goes. But Richard Curtis takes it one step too far, I think, where he walks her home and she invites him in, and it's almost like a coin flip where he's like, you know what? No, I don't need this. And I feel like he should have had that realization earlier, where at dinner, she could have been putting some moves on him, and he's just kind of like, oh, you know what? My girlfriend. And he realizes, like, in that moment, like, I don't want her to just be my girlfriend. Right. But in this moment, it's more like we need to go that extra mile for some reason other than showing how much Tim has grown, that he's on her doorstep before he's like, you know what? I want Mary for the rest of my life. That's all I need. And I feel like, yes, it's a nice moment, but it's a moment that could have happened earlier without there being that uncertainty of, is he a good person? Is he going to make a mistake? Like, what's he going to do? Because especially in a time travel movie where our protagonist controls time, he could go make that mistake, take it back without hesitation, and act like nothing ever happened.
Nothing ever happened, but psychologically it's there. That is why this movie got a pass for me, because with that dynamic being part of the story, one of the things that, like, again, and I'm not just saying Richard Curtis movies, it's in a lot of these romantic comedies where it is that predictable conflict where the dude is going to make a mistake. He's going to fuck up. He's going to sleep with somebody. He's going to flirt with someone too long. He's going to lie about a connection. If this was any other Richard Curtis movie or any other romantic comedy, he would have pulled that move, right? And realized, oh, I don't want to be with you. This is the catalyst that's going to make me ask my girlfriend to marry me. But then in Act 2 or Act 3, that girl's going to show back up and ruin everything. That is the traditional formula of plot structures like this. Dude, I was waiting for it. I was waiting for her to be at the parents' house. I was waiting for her to be like at a birthday party or a New Year's party. Like, and oh yes, that was so great when we had dinner. And then she'd be like, you guys had dinner on the night that you asked me to marry you? That's the formula that Richard Curtis is known for, and he didn't do it. And that's why I was, whoa, he didn't do what I was expecting him to do, because that is totally the formula he follows. And like you said, Tom's a time traveler. He could have slept with her. He could have gone back, fixed it, not even met her, but at least he would have known that he had the experience. And that is where you have to be like the kind of film appreciator where like you're going to make that decision of, can I still be on board with this guy where it's like he literally was this close to sleeping with a girl 3 or 4 times, going back to this moment to see how far he could get. And that is the moment he realized he wanted to go marry this girl that he's been living with and so called in love with, I think that we had to make the decision that he was devoted to Mary. He just wanted to see if he even had a chance. And when he realized that he did, that was good enough for him. I'm not condoning it, but I'm saying that at least it didn't go the formulaic route that I was expecting. So good on Richard Curtis for that.
I can see that and appreciate that. He's looking for a sense of closure, where she says it even when they're having dinner, that maybe she made a mistake not letting him make a move back when they were younger during the summer. So I can appreciate that.
Because, I mean, I'm sure you have. I mean, I spill my heart on these shows. I'm like, dude, I've had so many what ifs. This whole movie is about what ifs. What if I could go back in time and not say the stupid shit that I did? Or what if I could go back in time and be better in bed than I was the first time? Like, there's that scene too, which is very reminiscent of that movie, The Tall Guy.
That scene is probably the most accurate depiction of anything in this movie.
Right.
Like, that is one thing a guy would definitely do, especially if he is like madly in love with a girl, is he would make sure that first time is unforgettable.
Right. And then like she asks him again, he's like, dude, you don't realize I've already done it like 4 times already. So yeah.
And that begs the question, like, how does the physiology of that time travel work too? Like, no refractory period? That's interesting.
Dude, don't even get me started on that, because like I said, I avoided those holes on purpose because I didn't want to poke apart the logic.
There are 2 moments real quick. Sorry. 2 moments really quickly that I wanted to touch on, just because I feel like this is a movie that has kind of gone under the radar. I legitimately have not met anyone that has watched this movie and has not walked away being like, yeah, it was really good. I liked it. Surprised me, like you said. But there are 2 moments that I just absolutely love. And I feel like they are truly iconic. Even if you have never seen this movie, you've probably seen the moments that I'm about to reference. Mm-hmm. The first time we ever see Mary, the first time Tim ever sees Mary, is this really adorable moment where she's coming out of the blind restaurant and you get the lens flare, the beautiful warm light coming behind her, and she takes a little stumble because she's this perfect woman in Tim's eyes, and you get that like she's all that moment where she walks out, but then you get this little stumble just to show and convey how cute and adorable and normal she is. She's not this idyllic, beautiful Margot Robbie character. She is clumsy, she is awkward, she's not fully self-assured, but she's open about it. Like, she is comfortable talking about certain things. And it's a beautiful shot that conveys a lot about Mary in one literal, like, 3-second moment. The other iconic shot, which, as you can see in Antonio's background to my camera left here, the red dress where she's walking down the aisle in the red wedding dress. That's one I know most everyone has seen as well. They might not know the Il Mondo song that accompanies that moment, but Rachel McAdams walking down the aisle in that red dress is absolutely iconic. She looks stunning. The dress is perfect. Her movement is on point. Like, all of it is just pitch perfect and beautiful, and just continues to make Rachel McAdams probably one of the most underappreciated but best actresses working, even that this is 12 years ago now.
Mm-hmm. Well, that by far is the most Richard Curtis moment of the movie. The cute little stumble down the aisle with the cute wedding song and then going out into a windstorm. It's like, that is what we're expecting from the dude. And that's one of the things that I'm like, okay, that's your calling card. It's in there, because there weren't a lot of other calling cards in the movie. And so I gave it a pass. I gave this movie lots of passes. And the other thing, too, about this movie is that it does take a dramatic tonal shift right in the middle of the second act, where after he makes that first mistake, of trying to save his sister, going back, erasing a part of his timeline, and now having like this unsurety of this new timeline with, the child that he had already spent a long time with not being there, and recreating this and knowing how fragile this all is, even though he has this power that most people would kill for. So I feel like we are living in his own personal dilemmas of what this power means, and really facing the idea of like, how much of this do I actually deserve when I kind of formulated and manipulated myself into this so-called perfect life? We do get the dramatic followings in the second and third act towards that, where, there's more babies now, and there's family illness, and there is drama with the sister, and she's through recovery, and real life is what it is. It's real life. And for him, real life is not something he feels like he ever had to really deal with before because he has this power. And I think that's where Bill Nighy as the father comes in, being able to drop these little nuggets of things that he realizes his son has to learn on his own about how to control this power and not just utilize it and exploit it to make his life falsely happy. Because then that's the kind of creepiness of this movie, is you're not really allowing your partner or your family to live normal lives. They're lives that are kind of controlled by your will and manipulation. And again, that's where the story comes full circle and kind of redeems itself, because you really see the despair of someone who's realizing they're living in a fabricated reality.
And that's where the romantic comedy of the movie ends as well. Like,
It does.
we get through the wedding,
It stops.
and the movie takes, like you said, a tonal shift, and we start getting to the meat of the movie, where we find out that, yeah, Tim has been able to make this idyllic life for himself, but he's been focusing inwardly, focusing in on his things, and he's realizing that there are people around him who are suffering, people he cares about. And he learns through the sequence of events throughout the film that he can't change the past. And all of that culminates in Kit Kat's accident, where she has to come to terms for herself that she's an alcoholic. She needs to find steady work. She needs to get herself into recovery. She needs to get out of this toxic relationship she's had with this guy since Tim discovered that he had time traveling powers at the New Year's party. There's a whole different life that we haven't seen that has been dramatically affected by Tim kind of being absent and focused inwardly instead of outwardly with everyone else around him. And that's where, as we're saying, the movie takes a shift and it becomes more about finding the beauty in the imperfections of life, because Tim has created a pretty perfect life for himself, taking some of his dad's advice as well, because one of the first things he says is, oh, I'd love to win the lottery, make sure money's never a problem for me. And his dad's like, I've never met a genuinely happy rich person. It's not the get out of jail free card you think it is. Think smaller, think more intimate. And that's kind of, Tim takes it to heart to an extent, but this is the point where Tim starts really learning what it means to find beauty in the imperfections of life.
And the film's open-ended, because we believe that Tim's going to be a good dad and a good partner forever, but we don't have any guarantees on that. How can he really change after he's had this life of being able to manipulate his own history, therefore the history of other people in his own interpersonal life? And I think that's when it comes to the point the movie's trying to make is the imperfections of causality, of being able to create your own future the way you like it doesn't mean that it's going to be everything you want. The same way Bill Nye is talking about never meeting a person with lots of money that was truly happy. Like, you can go back and fix things all you want and change and manipulate them all you want, but once the challenge is gone in life, then you are literally going to be a depressed person. And if this was power in the wrong hands, then it could be something that you would exploit on a regular basis. You'll go sleep with everybody because you can erase it the next day, right? Again, it's the Groundhog Day effect, which I'm sure they were very hyper aware of not duplicating. I'm sure they watched Groundhog Day 50 times and be like, okay, let's not do that, because then people are going to say we're just copying Groundhog Day. It's a time loop movie that has like an exit strategy of being a time loop movie. And that's where I feel like there's some brilliance to it. But yeah, I think the other part too that I was definitely recognizing in the second watch is a lot of romantic comedies and just romance movies in general. And you'll hear people talk about this a lot on like the current relationship podcasts and Red Pill podcasts of how some of our favorite movies about romance are all based on infidelity. Like the woman eventually cheats on the guy that she's with because he's just not good enough as that person. The one they use all the time as an example is The Notebook, right? It's like, hey, James Marsden's character is a pretty good guy. He's got money, but instead she's going to fall in love and marry the toxic dude who threatens to kill himself on a Ferris wheel. Like that's the kind of stuff we're talking about where there was this misinterpretation of what true love really was. Like, oh, I want that crazy dude. I want that bad dude. Where I think in real life, stability is a little bit more important to some people. I mean, I think that's another reason why there's so many like relationships in crisis is because I believe both men and women have been manipulated through media and movies and books of what relationships are supposed to look like and are definitely not supposed to be that way because those are fantasies, those are movies and novels. Richard Curtis is notorious for that. And in this movie, he fixes a lot of it by saying that, hey, there are so many open-ended questions to both of these people because we have no idea if Tom's going to continue to being a good husband and father. We have no idea if Mary's got something going on too, because you can even tell in her mind and in her performance, which Rachel McAdams again is great, where she's even unsure. The whole idea of having that security baby, that third baby, the way she brings it up in conversation, my heart almost went out to her because I was like, she recognizes that there is a, let's call it a flippancy in Tom, and that she thinks that a third baby is like the one that's going to make things work, the security baby. That I think was supposed to be a funny line, but deep inside, I think there's a lot of dark truth to the way some people feel about their relationships, where it's like, if this is a real relationship, if this is a real marriage, if this is a real partnership, then the third baby, where like if the two are idiots, at least we might have one smart one. It's kind of a joke, but there is a dark truth to it. And so I think it really opens up a lot about her character that we don't get to see so much in the movie because we're spending so much time with Tom, that I thought that was a very brilliant way to like leave the open-endedness of what this relationship really is. And I'm not saying there should be a sequel, but that's the whole point of the movie. It's like, let fate decide instead of your time traveling manipulation.
I like that interpretation a lot. Actually, it's something that still fills me. I have 3 kids of my own, and that third baby conversation is always rough because it's like, we've already got 2. They're a handful. Right? Do we really want to be outnumbered at this point? And from like the real world perspective, like that's my perspective of it. And my interpretation of how like that conversation went. And obviously I lost that bet with number 3, but with Tim, the added layer of there's no baby yet. There's no fertilization that's happened yet. He can keep going back in time and spending time with his dad. But once the goal line that they set essentially is that once the baby is born, because that's kind of when you, as a father, kind of imprint on the kid because you're not experiencing the pregnancy. So like, I think that's another plot hole that is really kind of missed by Richard Curtis in the script. Excuse me, is that you find out fairly early on, like within the first trimester, whether it's a boy or a girl. And so when he sets the goalpost of when the baby is born, that's when you can't come back anymore. Like my thought process was, well, I'm a girl dad. I have 3 girls. If what we were doing was trying for a boy in any of those circumstances, I could keep going back and doing whatever I need to do until we get that boy call. And thankfully I don't have that power, and I don't know that I would ever make that decision, but it's something that, again, someone in a different situation might do that. And I think that's something that Tim possibly could have done, but we never go that deep into his relationship with his kids. It's always more focused on the first kid. That's like the one that we connect with as well. But the idea that when the baby is born is the stopping point. And so when Mary is like, oh, seems like tonight's the night I might have the baby. He goes back to visit his dad one more time in a very beautiful scene where he says one final goodbye, which, as everyone who has seen every episode of the Cultworthy that I've ever been on, dad relationships get me every time. Can't
Me
can't
too,
not
dude.
happen.
That's why I think you brought this movie, honestly.
And again, that's where the movie pivots, like a final time, where it's not just about finding the beauty in the imperfections in life, finding the beauty in the pain in life, um, realizing that you can't fix all your problems with a magic wand. It's also about just a father-son relationship. And it's one of those things that, for me especially, having said goodbye to my dad in 2020, and I didn't get a chance to have a conversation with him. He was at a point where he was not able to have a conversation.
Mhm.
And so for me to be able to see and kind of have a little bit of a catharsis with Tim and say goodbye to my dad in a different way, like, how would I handle that situation? Like, it's one of those things that it's a joyful pain saying goodbye in a way like that. And it's just like, would you put yourself through that to say goodbye one final time in a way that you get to share one final good memory, but how bittersweet is it really?
And that's the part that got me too, because like with my dad, who I lost in 2017, my last conversation with him was literally me chastising him to be a better person. And that was a hard thing because the next day he was gone. So anytime I see a movie like this where someone does have the opportunity to go back and say another goodbye and another goodbye and another goodbye, and that's the whole point of that third baby, is he knows that if that third baby comes, then he won't be able to go back to the point where his dad was still alive and have those conversations again. Like, it pretty much, he has to be the responsible one and put his family and his life with his partner ahead of his own personal gratifications, which I think it depends on what kind of person you are watching this film. Because I think if there's one thing we've learned in the last few years in this country, is that we are surrounded by unempathetic sociopaths more than we thought. We really are. People who are putting themselves and their own personal needs, not even their families, their own personal needs and wants above other people. I watch a movie like this and I know that I have empathy because I understand the decision he's trying to make. Is like, if I have that third baby and he says, let's wait on it, he's coming from a place of personal need. He's coming from a place of selfishness, of not wanting to give up this luxury he's had of being able to go back and visit his dad who's passed away. That was a really important moment for me, where it's like, okay, I am now, and she's great too, because she doesn't let him take time. He's like, let's wait. And she's like, okay, now, how about now? How about now? She knows him so well that if she doesn't get an answer in that conversation, then it could be something that will last and toxify the relationship. She's a lot sharper than I think the movie gives her credit for. And I can't tell if that's her performance doing it or if it's in the writing, but whatever it is, it works, because it does make him make that decision of like, I am going to put my family and life. I've already screwed it up once, making a selfish decision. I'm not going to do it again. And that's what the movie really won me over, was with the dad stuff and with the reminding myself that empathy does exist in the world, and it's the most important thing, especially right now. And we have to embrace it and not champion all these non-empathetic people just because they have social clout. That's really what I took away from the ending of this movie.
I love that that's what you took away from it, because maybe you can just articulate it better than I can, but that's one of the reasons I love this movie. I love movies that are sincere. I love movies that make you empathize, that they make you feel, and they make you understand the characters. Like we talked about a little bit, Mary, the first like 3 times she appears on screen, the very first time, charming, wonderful, beautiful, articulate, absolutely just perfect. And then the second and third times we see her, it's really weird because she comes across more as someone just like waiting for an opportunity to click with someone and just get into a forever relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But as the movie grows and we see Tim and Mary grow in their relationship, that's when we see how they work together as a couple. And yeah, Tim's manipulating everything so that things are probably not as, let's say, hostile as other relationships can be, or argumentative. Like the moment they find out that Tim's dad is dying of cancer, he's trying to break away from a fight because he left the baby, or the toddler, alone with her manuscripts that she's supposed to be reading for work. And they're in the middle of a fight, and he's just like, just give me 2 seconds, just 2 seconds. And she's like, she obviously doesn't know what's going on. So she's just like, the hell, you're going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
This needs to be talked out now. And it's one of those moments, because it's punctuated with the tragedy of finding out that his dad is dying, that do you want to relive that moment?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it means fixing a fight, do you want to go back to a point where you're lying in bed, potentially about to have sex with your wife, and get that call, or just come back to that moment and all of a sudden you're in a weird space because you know that call is coming?
Yeah.
It's one of those moments that really punctuates what the movie is about, because he can't go back and fix that moment, or he won't go back and fix that moment, because it's a moment that is just too painful to relive, and you can't fix a moment like that.
Like I said, this movie did a lot more for me than other Richard Curtis films did, and that's why I appreciate it a lot more, because there is nothing I want more than to be pleasantly surprised by a filmmaker who I have a rocky relationship with. And it happens before. Like M. Night Shyamalan, if he makes a movie that blows me away, it's not going to make me forgive for all the crap I've had to watch for the last 20 years, but I will be so impressed by the fact that I am able to get over that prejudice of his style of filmmaking and actually enjoy the movie for what it is. And that's what this did for me. And it's good. Like, to break away enough from the genre and type of film that you're known for, but still have like little snippets of your DNA in it. It worked. But I think the fact that this is more about this character, Tom, the interpersonal drama and the what if factor that we would all love to have. Like, what if I could go back in time and fix this? That is what really carried the movie for me. And yeah, I gave it, I think, 3 stars, because it's not my favorite Richard Curtis movie. The Pirate Radio is, but this is a real worthy addition. And, you know, normally I say that I won't buy something unless it goes on my shelf. Well, I bought this because it was $1 at the thrift store, and that's cheaper than renting it on streaming. But it'll stay on my shelf because I know I'm going to watch it again, because I feel like I haven't fully absorbed it yet. And I want to watch it with my partner too, because I think it is a good movie for people to watch together, because there are no argumentative moments in this movie like When Harry Met Sally. I never want to watch that movie with a partner, because, well, someone's going to take Harry's side, someone's going to take Sally's side, and most times those movies turn into arguments. To me, this is something that both people can learn from, because at points in the movie, everyone in this movie is wrong about something, and you can relate to it, and it's an obvious talking point, not a get on your soapbox and preach that I'm right, they're wrong kind of thing. So yeah, it's deeper than I really thought it was going to be. So thank you for bringing it to the show.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Even 3 stars, I'll take it. If I'm assuming it's 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd, if I'm remembering. Yeah. So, slightly above average, 6 out of 10. I have rose-colored glasses with this, because, like I said, Ricky, my wife, we saw this when we were, I think, even before we were ever engaged. It was just a fun weekend out, and we were just so pleasantly surprised at free tickets turning into something that was so good. If you're this far into this episode, I would recommend watching it. Try to forget everything you can that you've heard, and like go into it blind, kind of the same way I would recommend going into Your Name. If you heard that Animation April episode about Your Name, try to forget it and go into that movie as blind as you can, because
Agreed.
I think you take more of it away if you go into it blind, and you have like your own set of expectations, and you're not hearing people talk about it. And then you go in like, oh, well, they said this and they said that, and I don't feel that way. I think if you go into it blind, you'll have a better experience with it.
So the one little piece of trivia I found, and this is from the IMDb trivia, which I treat with a grain of salt because it's, user based. People can just go in there and edit it like Wikipedia. So I'm not sure how true this is, but one of the things it did say that Zooey Deschanel was the original person cast for Mary, and then she dropped out of the film because of the show that she was doing, and Rachel McAdams took over the role. I am so glad that happened if that's true, because this movie would not be the same if it was Zooey Deschanel in that role. And I like her, but I don't think that the empathy for the character would have been there, because I think she would have been too quirky and too aloof. Where Rachel McAdams, there is an aloofness and quirkiness to her character, but once we get to know her and she's in the depths of this marriage and this relationship, that's where things get real and that's where things get raw. And I was all for that performance, and I really wouldn't want to see anyone else doing it, let alone Zooey Deschanel. So if that is true, I'm glad that we got what we got and not that original casting idea.
I'm really interested to see how she would handle some of the more dramatic moments, because all my main experience with her is from New Girl and Elf, which obviously Elf you have to take with a huge grain of salt because she's very young in that film.
And 500 Days of Summer, which is kind of like
500,
the most anti-romantic comedy ever.
Yeah, I have a bad taste in my mouth from that one, just because I don't think I understood what that one was going in. That movie was when I went into it. Sort of like Sweet November with Keanu Reeves and
Charlize
geez, I'm forgetting. Charlotte, thank you. I was gonna say Cameron Diaz, but I knew that wasn't right. That movie I still hold as like one of the worst movies I've ever seen, but I've only ever seen it the once. So maybe I'm wildly wrong on that. But Sweet November is one of those movies that I will not be going back to.
As we're closing up this conversation, I think that the next time I'll probably see you will be in April for our Animation April Cultworthy anime episode. It'll be our 4th one, I think, so that'll be cool. And I would love for you to tell my listeners where they can find you, where to look for you on the socials, because you and I have gotten off of a lot of socials lately, and I feel like we are limiting the amount of places where people can find us in that realm, other than just going straight to our feed on Spotify or Apple Pods.
Yeah, I'm not sure how Apple works for me right now, because as far as I know, I'm subscribed to us, but every like 3 weeks, I'm no longer subscribed to us. So
that's weird.
If you use YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, those would probably be the 3 main I would recommend. I know Apple Podcasts is huge, but I think there's something from when we initially transferred our host servers over. I got a little antsy, and I think something got screwed up with our RSS feed. So I would recommend going to our link tree, but we're also on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook. We have a TikTok that I've made a few videos for, but making videos and reels and stuff is really time consuming, and I don't have the time for that. So those aren't things that I do too often, but I would say Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads would be the 3 main ones to find us on. But if you want, as far as social media interactions, we also have a Discord. That might be the best way to find us.
Yeah, go to Discord. I need to do one of those.
Yeah. But our link tree would be the best way to find like all of those things. And then, find us on your favorite podcatcher, Talking Smack, superheroes, movies, animation, comics. Our social media feeds are at Talking Smack Pod, as you can see in my name here, if that's going to be coming in the video, wherever it may be. I don't know how these translate over. But I appreciate everyone taking the time to watch this episode. Hopefully we convinced you to watch About Time. Like I said, it's one of my favorite movies. That it's always one of those good movies to sit down and just make you feel stuff and remember you're alive and that the world can be beautiful in a way.
Yeah, I love that. And if I'm keeping it on my shelf, that means that I like it enough to watch it again, and encourage all of you to go and watch it or rewatch it. Let me know your opinions. You can do it on my social medias too, or at thecultworthy.com. So Josh, I love talking to you. I'll see you again in April. If I'm not on your show sooner, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I'll see you later. Okay, buddy?
Sounds great. Thanks.